Welcome to Every Night is Game Night, because we all love game nights with our family and friends. But when you play solo games, then every night can be a game night. Check us out along with other great podcasts at dicetowernetwork.com.
Every Night is Game Night, episode 97, Design and Iteration of Grimslingers, with the designer, Stephen Gibson. Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to the Every Night is Game Night podcast. I'm your host, Jason. Thank you so much for joining us. This week, we are back to bringing you interviews from designers. We have Stephen Gibson, the designer of Grimslingers. He is going to talk about the game and also talk about the design and iteration process around Grimslingers. This is one of those cases where even if you're not interested in the game itself for various reasons, which we'll actually get into, we're going to talk about some of the struggles that Grimslingers has had. But really, the story of the game is really interesting because it's on its 3rd edition. There's a 4th edition. Why? So we had a really fun conversation with Stephen about that process and about going back and forth with publishers. Really interesting, so we hope you stay tuned for that. But before we get to that particular piece, But before we get to the interview, I wanted to hit In Liz We Trust. Liz has given us another one of her excellent Kickstarters for you. But before we get to Stephen, I wanted to get to the In Liz We Trust segment first. She's talking about a pretty cool project called Siege Storm. It is, as we drop the episode, about less than a week to go on the project. We like to talk about stuff that has a little bit more time, but this is a really cool project. I wanted to make sure that it was highlighted for you. So let's get to In Liz We Trust, and then we'll get to Stephen.
Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm here to feed your Every Night is Game Night acquisition disorder. This week I want to talk about Siege Storm, a card combat game that is for 2 players, but also, you guessed it, can be played solo. You can also play 2-person co-op if that's your sort of thing. In the solo mode of Siege Storm, you go up against various bosses to test your mettle and see if you can outthink the AI. This game prides itself on ease of entry. It takes very little time to learn, and one game lasts about 20 minutes. This does not, however, mean that Siege Storm lacks interesting choices. Each of your cards can be played in one of 3 ways, and Siege Storm allows you to create powerful card combos. At about $39 plus shipping, it's definitely worth a look. Happy gaming.
All right. Thank you very much, Liz. And now we are on to the meat of the episode, which is an interview with this gentleman. As I said in the introduction, he is the designer of Grimslingers. He is Mr. Stephen Gibson. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
All right, very cool. And to help me out here, we have a person who has also played the Northern Territory expansion. Here at Every Night is Game Night, we want to give you the as much expertise as possible. So I reached out into the Twitterverse, and I found a person who has also played through the first campaign of the expansion. This is Wendy Barlow from the Singlehandedly blog. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason.
I said welcome back to the show. You've been on the show before. You're an old friend by now.
I have. Welcome back. Right. It's nice to be back.
Excellent. Hopefully you won't be a stranger. Cool. So let's get into talking about Grimslingers. Not only are we going to talk about the game itself, Grimslingers. So, it's a very interesting game. We'll definitely get into it in a second. But it's on its 3rd edition. And with the Northern Territory, it's kind of a 4th edition experience. So not only are we going to talk about the game, we're going to talk about the process of iterating, the process of kind of releasing something out into the wild, getting feedback, releasing a thing and the thing and the thing, and how the community responds to that whole thing. So it's kind of, we're not just going to talk about the game, we're going to talk about some sort of issues around the game that will hopefully be interesting to people who, are looking at other, 2nd editions, 3rd editions, and, wondering what the story is behind all that. Okay, but before we get into all that, we are about the stories that people bring to their games. So, Mr. Gibson.
Hi.
Hey, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself. So you're the designer and you're the artist. Which would you say is primary for you, if there's one or the other?
It's kind of the whole thing, but I would say designer more.
Okay.
I think other people would say artist, but
yes.
I enjoy designing much more than I enjoy doing art.
Interesting, because I ask it the way I ask it because that's the first thing you notice about Grimslingers. Like, the art is so gnarly. There's nothing like this. Like, it turns your head. I remember being in my home store, the Portal, and seeing it on the shelf and watching other people, people who are just like walking around the shelves. They kind of catches their eye, turns their heads and goes, what is that? The glowing eyes and the...
I'm glad people like it, actually.
It truly does feel like the artwork glows, though. It really does seem like it's alive. So it definitely draws you in immediately.
Thank you.
You said what was it, Trigun? I have no idea what that's talking about.
Every time I play Grimslingers, I'm reminded of Trigun. Have you ever watched Trigun, the anime? I can't spit it out.
Me, no.
Yes. I was wondering if you had pulled any influence from that particular show, because every time I play it, I keep getting that back.
Well, I'll have to check it out here. Trigun.
It's about Trigun. It's about a gunslinger, in a futuristic kind of Forgotten West kind of world too, and he's got a bounty on his head. Except he's a little goofy, but
that sounds like Grimslinger. Sounds cool.
I mean it really is cool. So if you get a chance, check it out, and then tell me if I'm wrong, thinking that they're kind of parallel in my mind a little bit.
No, it's probably something, but no, I didn't watch that. There are other influences, but
what are some of those influences?
Well, I guess the Dark Tower. I wasn't thinking about it at the time, but I had definitely read it and really liked that. I think there are a few things. The art was like, all of Grimslingers is kind of a happy accident with some unhappy accidents, and the art is part of that experience. So I don't know how much you want me to go into detail at the moment, but...
Right. Well, I guess we'll take it a step back and let's talk about like yourself. Like when did you start gaming?
I guess like most nerds, when I was a kid. When I just started board gaming, it's like in middle school, I was playing EverQuest, and there were some things that bugged me about it. And I was like, it'd be cool if we could make like our own game. And so me and my friend started trying to make our own pen and paper game. That was like, obviously we wanted to turn it into a video game one day, but we just kept making pen and paper type D&D style games. And that was kind of when I started designing stuff. And I've just always played games, like most nerds.
Nerds are cool now.
That's right.
They are. Yeah.
It's the age of the geek.
Yeah.
Is Grimslinger... actually, what was your first published game?
It's Grimslingers.
Okay. Okay, so maybe we can get into a little bit of that, to how you got into the design and development of Grimslingers. And was it always something that you wanted to just kind of like do everything for, is that something kind of that was really important to you to do?
I definitely didn't want to do everything. I still don't. And it's just, I don't know, I guess I'm kind of a control freak, but originally I had finished college. I was specializing in 3D modeling for mobile games, also some animation. I got a job with the mobile game studio as a concept artist, which was weird, but they paid good money, so I was like, all right. And the company immediately tanked. And at the time, I was developing an idea for like a really simple, like back and forth game, mobile game, and it was called Elemental Duels. And when I couldn't find more work, I just kept working on this little game, and then the idea. There's this thing called feature creep where you keep like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if the game was like this and like that? And I just kept adding things, and then I had different programmers that were helping me build it. You can actually YouTube, I think it's on the Kickstarter too, a little video of what the app looked like. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like sword and sorcery, pixelated kind of thing. And but the programmers kept leaving because of one thing or another. So I was like, I need a way where like I don't have to depend on anyone else to produce this. So it's like I came across the Game Crafter website, which is kind of like a do-it-yourself print-on-demand thing. I was like, man, like I could make my own board game. I can do the art. I can design it, whatever. So I started working on that, and then I kind of outgrew the Game Crafter and was trying a different route till eventually I went to Kickstarter with the idea, and it was successful. So that's kind of like my roundabout journey. for the start of Grimslingers and where it came from.
Cool. So we are going to get into the first edition, second edition, third edition, signing with Greenbrier and all that a little bit after. What I want to do is I want to feature the actual game itself that people can kind of get in their hands and play, which is the third edition of Grimslingers and also Northern Territory. So we went over a lot of what Grimslingers is in the previous episode with Walter, so I'm not going to go over too much. I think in a nutshell, it's kind of a 2-in-1 game. It's like it's a short competitive dueling game, like you mentioned before, the Elemental Duels kind of thing. I can see kind of how a game called Elemental Duels led to this,
yeah,
so to speak. But it's also kind of this solo co-op adventure card game. So think in the realm of Warhammer Quest adventure card game or Pathfinder adventure card game, but like with its own kind of very unique twists, where you're just playing cards, you're beating enemies, you're progressing through a story, and it's all pretty much all card based. So we're going to cover mostly the campaign mode because that's what Wendy and I have played, and I think that's what our audience is more familiar with. So tell me a little bit about, or tell us a little bit about, like what led to that? Like what led to you turning this dueling game into an adventure card game, and were you intentionally drawing from any influences, or did it just kind of like come about organically?
I'm actually not a big board gamer, or I wasn't at the time, which some people who have played Grimslingers might be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And like I said, I was trying to make a video game, but the original thing I offered on Kickstarter had no co-op. It was just the dueling thing. But like I said, when I was in the grade 7 or whatever, I'd always wanted to make these campaign D&D style games. I just never thought I could successfully do it. And when the Kickstarter was doing well, I was like, well, I have some ideas. And I was like, hey guys, what if there was like a solo co-op portion? And people were like, ate it up. And I was like, sweet. Problem was, I literally didn't have, like, I had nothing really. It was just an idea. And so it successfully, what I thought was going to work did not when I went to actually build it. And so Greenbrier was nice. They gave me months to try and figure out what I was doing and the story I was telling, and then eventually landed on something that worked pretty well. And the co-op portion, which when you play the game, you can see that the co-op portion is really where Grimslinger shines, and that's always where my heart was and where it wanted to go.
You hear people talk about adventure card games a lot, suggest for me an adventure card game. And Grimslingers, I guess, somehow doesn't quite get mentioned in that conversation. I think it should. It absolutely should. Because it's definitely of a piece with some of these other games. So I guess, Wendy, you've played a couple of adventure card games, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I
love adventure card games.
How would you say Grimslingers kind of compares? Like what's distinct about it? All that kind of thing.
I think the reason that it's not mentioned more is just because it's so different. It's not your average cookie cutter, right? It's not go get yourself a knight, go equip them with a sword, and go hack and slash through the game. So I think that's why it's left out of a lot of those conversations, and people forget that it is there and that it is a legitimate adventure card game. Some people get stuck with the dueling aspect and just say, oh, it's just putting down cards. Because I've read a lot online about people talking about Grimslingers, and I'm sure everyone else has too. And they talk a lot about the dueling, it's just dueling, but it's not. There's more to that. And I think that a lot of people don't see that. They don't see the actual adventure part, but it offers its own unique style. And I think, Stephen, you did that really well. You separated yourself from the pack, and I think because you separated yourself so far from the pack, I think that people think of you outside the pack. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that's a compliment, though. I like that.
Oh, it was meant as a compliment. It's something, and that's what drew me originally to this game, was the fact that first of all, the art. You just clicked on that Kickstarter and you saw that picture just up there, and it was like, what is that? And then since I primarily game solo, I was kind of like, well, card dueling is not really up my alley because, I don't know how often I'll do with a duel. But then when the solo mode came on, I was like, what? Okay, now I'm in. And then when the Tall Tales campaign was announced, that there was actually going to be a campaign that you could play through either cooperatively or solo, then it just raised it to the level, and there was no doubt that I was going to own this in my collection.
Are you
And
talking about the original Kickstarter?
well, the original Kickstarter, I had to, I didn't back the original Kickstarter, but it was
Oh,
on my save list because I was like, ooh, that's beautiful.
Okay.
And I kind of kept it there. And then when I saw the relaunch with, the whole, you can play solo and all, that's when I was like, okay, now we're talking.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to get behind it the second time.
So let's talk about mechanisms, then we can talk about the theme. Mechanism-wise, I think Grimslingers is distinct because there's this kind of, you develop this system of hand management, right? I think it's one of the heavier hand management type adventure card games because you have your hand of cards, you have a discard pile, you have a deactivated pile, and then with the Northern Territory expansion, you kind of amped it up with the next level where in the regular base game, your hand is kind of unlimited. But then there's, in the Northern Territory expansion, you introduce hand size and max stash size and all this other stuff. I guess, for you, is that kind of where the core of the experience comes in, like that kind of ongoing hand management throughout the story?
I don't think of it that way.
Okay.
When I'm designing it, it's like, I want to do this, and then problems happen. So it's like, okay, how do I solve this problem, or how do I make this flow nicely? And to be fair, I this is my first game. It's really an indie game. Sure, Greenbrier is publishing it, and they're pretty indie themselves too. But I think people need to understand that. For me, it was kind of like this work in progress. There's a lot of, I guess we'll get into it, but there's a lot of heart and charm to it, and some rough edges. So in terms of hand management, it just plays into part of it. I just want you to be able to make interesting choices. It's always about interesting choices. And should I do this or should I do that? And I like it to be a puzzle because I think puzzles are fun in that way. So I guess for me, when I think of hand management, in my mind, I'm thinking of the puzzle. On this turn, how do I solve this puzzle to be in the most beneficial way for me?
Mm-hmm.
There was definitely some tough choices that I had to make as far as hand management while I was playing through this. What to toss, what to keep stashed, what to get rid of completely because my stash is full. It was like, trying to keep all my board games in my house, There's not enough room.
Yeah.
So, but there definitely were some tough choices, and I did feel the puzzly aspect that you were trying to get across. I did feel it because I was trying to think, okay, well, what do I think I'm going to need? And going into the second playthrough of Tall Tales, I had played through it before, and I think I had the second edition maybe. I had played through it at that time, so I kind of had a hint as to what was coming my way, so I was able to manage my hand a little differently. So I didn't remember it that well that I knew exactly what to play, but I did remember it enough to know, okay, I think I need to build my deck this way because I think this is coming up. So that helped me a little bit, but there were definitely tough choices to be made.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
And then, in terms of the story, like you said before, you're a D&D head. You and me are right there, man. I'm a D&D person until the cows come home. So the story here with Grimslingers is really, really immersive. There's a lot of writing, and it's pretty whimsical, like you were saying before. You have the talking cat and the llama llama sip sip thing, and the goblins, and there's lots of little kind of funny things that happen.
Yeah.
So that there's a very definite tone to it. What I definitely noticed though, especially playing through the first one, it's a coherent story. You go A to B to C to D, and once you're done with it, you're kind of done with it. You could play you could play through it again, but you lose something because the narrative is so kind of there. Is that,
Yeah.
Was that something that you were happy with the way that turned out? Would you, if you had to do it over again, would you make it a little bit more open-ended, or is it something like, okay, that's the one I wanted?
Well, you guys know in the Northern Territory, it technically is a straight line, but I think of it like a straight line, and there are different straight lines in a sense. That's not making sense, but there are different paths you can take, and then depending, especially in the Northern Territory, you can swap between paths, and things have changed. It's like as if time had passed differently, so you miss out on things. But so in the Northern Territory, I did try and go more into like you can do different things, but overall, with the original campaign, like I only had so much time to write it, like I was saying, before we had to ship it, and it was already like probably a year past when it was supposed to ship. So I only had so much time, but the most important thing to me was I just wanted you to have an experience and to enjoy that experience. Like for me, I don't replay. I mean, I don't, as a person, enjoy replaying the same thing over and over usually, especially a narrative experience. Other people do, but for me, it's kind of like I like short, sweet stories where it's like, oh, that was awesome. And like I can look back on that moment and think that was a cool story. And I enjoyed how that happened. And, you know, when there's games like, say, Dragon Age Inquisition or Mass Effect, where there's like a billion different things you can do and routes you can take, I don't enjoy doing that because I just don't have that time on my hands to like go through everything and see how it turns out. So I like ones that kind of take me on a journey and kind of whisk me away for a time, and like a movie, more or less. And with the Northern Territory, different things can happen, but it's still ending at the same point, because I am trying to, I think in order to tell, for me anyway, a cohesive story that's going somewhere and that place has impact, you kind of have to have a linear story, more or less.
Yeah, so like you have the Valley of Death campaign, which is the third edition of the base game. You can buy that right now. And then Northern Territory introduces the Child of Light campaign, which has these 3 paths. But if you take the llama path, 1, 2, 3 steps, and then you step to the heart path, that step will, like, you'll skip stuff that happened in the heart path. So like let's say there's a person that's alive in the heart path. If you take it all the way, if you take the llama path and then divert, that person's now dead.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Time has passed. So like, I guess that was your answer. Like you put in the 3 paths, but at the same time, it's like, I think Wendy and I would agree. Like we both took different paths. Like I took the llama path. She took the skull path. I don't feel the need to kind of do the llama path again.
Right.
No, if I played again, I would do the llama path or the heart path, because it felt to me, and I think this is, I'm not going to, of course, put words in your mouth. What you're trying to say is like these 3 paths are happening at the same time.
Yes.
So when you're moving in between the paths, they're still happening even though you're not there, like real life. And I heard people complain about that too. And I was like, but it's like real life, just because I'm not hanging out with someone doesn't mean that they're not off doing something without me.
No, man,
so it's
time
just
stops.
like this.
If you're not on this podcast, I just stare at the wall.
So yeah, so it's I think that's what people need to understand is that these 3 paths are happening at the same exact time, just like real life. And as you're moving in between the paths, if you choose to do that, things have happened while you were not there. And there are consequences of those things that happened while you were not there, which I thought was a really cool thing because it was, again, just like real life to me. And I love that the Child of Light campaign picked up right where Tall Tales ended. I love that it just picked right up from where it was. It was like, oh, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that happened. That's kind of cool. And so that was really cool. And so I'm assuming that if there's a game that comes after this, that maybe that would pick up right where this left off and maybe take us down another avenue. But every time I play this game, I get in my head, I have a whole graphic novel playing out in my head. So this game definitely lends itself to that kind of feel to me.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the Northern Territory, like you mentioned before, it started as a dueling game and people kind of think of it as a dueling game. The Northern Territory, I guess 90 to 95% of it applies to the adventure part of the game. Would that be fair?
I'd say 80%. I do think the dueling is much better in the Northern Territory with the variable player powers and stuff like that. I actually really enjoy it myself. I personally don't enjoy dueling in just the core game anymore. But the Northern Territory, I just find the skills way more interesting. But I don't know how many people actually duel when they grab the Northern Territory, because I think they're mostly just grabbing it for the story.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's mainly for the story. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So is there anything else you wanted to touch on with Northern Territory before we kind of circle back and talk about the development of the Grimslingers?
Do you maybe want to talk about what they added in Northern Territories, like some of the new, like the creature dispositions and things like that?
Yes. We should get into a little bit that, yeah.
You want me to talk about it? I totally can. So a lot of it is answering player feedback. So you have multiple...
Cool.
multiple story paths, because before people were like, there's no replayability. I love the story, but I would never want to replay it again. So at least in this one, for lore junkies, you would want to play every option, or at least read through them, because there's little lore tidbits that are different in each one that give you a little insight into something. I don't know if anyone's picked up on that yet, but I am very aware of the lore, and there's little things that help you figure out what is really going on, especially when it comes to Icarus. So there's different paths you can take. There's no more level trackers. Instead, there's like a progress points, and there's like an achievement list. So I wanted to encourage people playing different ways and trying different activities. So in order to level up, you have to check off achievements, and those give you progress points. And then instead of a level tracker, you've got this big progress sheet where you can customize your character in a lot of different ways, and really build them out kind of towards your play style and selecting their skills and stuff. And then there's the only 4 characters, 6 in total if you had the Kickstarter stuff, have their own, they kind of got their own unique mechanics and their own set of 8 skills. So like Kipper, it's all about using his sword, and he's able to transform into this huge beast. Nuno, it's all about his gun and using Alma, his ghost companion. So it really changes your, at least when you're playing, your experience depending on which character you have. And then stuff like creature dispositions. A lot of people, now I don't personally agree with this, were suggesting there wasn't much strategy to the duel. So dispositions is a way to add one more piece to the puzzle element of it all, and also to encourage trying different things and playing different ways. Like, I have to make it pass in order to kill it faster, or like, we need to pass. So like, when's the best time to pass? And then there's more creatures, and there's stuff like, there's like a curse that's added to kind of change it up, and stuff like that. Did I miss anything?
I think the biggest change was the map system, right?
Oh, yeah. I forgot.
For me.
Yeah, so the map, before it was like a set map, but now it's a deck of, it's actually, I think it's 56 playing cards, because there's 4 wilds, but it's like a legit playing card deck. It's called the Fate deck, and you, depending on which area you're going to, you lay it out and you lay it face down. Some cards are face up. Those are your landmarks. Those are like places that never change. But then everything else is random. So it could be an attack. It could be a treasure chest. It could be the key to the treasure chest. It could be an event. So you're kind of exploring, and it kind of has this fog of war adventure to it. And it's really customizable. And yeah, I think the map system works. The only downside is it takes a while to set up.
Yes. And the different
it takes
variable
a ton of
things.
space too.
Yeah. The different variable things that you did, like, the Jack of Clubs is the, the Witch Grotto or whatever, the all these different things. So you have to, like, I think Wendy downloaded this little like cheat sheet thing, and you cut out the different names
I made it
of
myself.
the places. Oh, you made it yourself?
I made it myself, yeah. I made a little cheat sheet where I just made little cards to cover up the different landmark ones that said, the King's Altar and things like that. So I knew, just
smart.
looking at it right there, that's what it was, because it was hard for me to remember that was the Jack of Hearts or what have you.
Yeah, that seems fair.
Cool. So let's go into how, like, we're talking about Northern Territory, we're talking about Grimslingers, we're talking about, like, how the game has kind of changed. There's a whole story behind that, and I thought that would be really interesting for our listeners to kind of peek into. So let's go back. So when you launched the original Kickstarter, was it with Greenbrier?
No.
Okay. So how did that all develop?
Well, I launched it myself. I was going to use makeplayingcards.com. They have some pretty good deals. It's a little more expensive than a publisher, but I wanted to self-publish. But Tony Galati, who was one of the backers who designed a character, which was actually, his character was Cute Kipper. Oh. He worked for Greenbrier Games, and he said, hey guys, like, there's a sweet game that I really like. It's being self-published. Maybe we want to pick it up. So he got me in touch with Greenbrier, and then we made a deal, and they were going to publish it. That created a lot of turmoil for Kickstarter backers, because I launched the campaign as if I was doing a certain thing, and then when a publisher came on, things needed to change in order for it to work. I was never going to sell it in retail, and then obviously a publisher wanted to. But they there were lots of other benefits that came with it, but there were some cons too. And anyway, move forward with Greenbrier, released the game, first edition.
And then, so I guess you did the first edition. The first edition had the adventure mode in it. That was, the game was popular. You kind of put that in there. Talk a little bit about, because you mentioned fan feedback. You mentioned how Northern Territory and some of the stuff grew out of fan feedback. I imagine that there was a little bit of an adventurous time with the fan feedback to the first edition. So maybe you could talk about how that kind of led to from first to second and how you and Greenbrier were working together for that.
Yeah. I wouldn't say Greenbrier, they kind of left me to my own device, which is probably why first edition had so many rough edges. But basically they're like, yeah, produce the game and send us the stuff, and we'll play it a couple times and it'll be good. But so when it finally got released, and you get player feedback about like, this is wrong or that is wrong, or there's typos and stuff like that. I think every game's like that now, but the print run was small. It was probably like 5,000 copies. So when you're going to reprint it, I wanted to fix stuff people had given me feedback on. Greenbrier only wanted to update the rule book because I don't know how much it costs, but it costs money to reprint certain things. Like if you change it for a reprint, it costs extra money than if you just print it as is. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to change as little as possible. So second edition, we had a chance for different card quality that was matte, and I personally love matte cards. I know some people don't like the cardstock because it's sticky until you use it a lot. Mm-hmm. But I hate glares because for me, a lot of stuff is about art and how it visually looks. So matte is perfect. So we changed it to matte cardstock, updated the rule book. I implemented as much player feedback as I could on the rule book because I literally keep notes of everything people say online, everywhere: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Board Game Geek, random blogs that I find, because I have like Google Alerts set up, so anytime someone mentions Grimslingers, it alerts me and I can take notes for what people are saying. So then there was going to be the second edition sold out, so third edition. So again, I updated the rule book based on everything. This was the Kickstarter at the time, actually. So the story for the third edition was Greenbrier needed another Kickstarter. They wanted me to do just a small expansion to Grimslingers, like maybe like another chapter to the story and just some small tweaks. But I wanted to take the opportunity to just really expand on stuff because I had actually been working on a sequel to Grimslingers. So I took a lot of stuff I was working on for the sequel of like fixing stuff, and then I implemented it into the expansion. So that was like the map system, the progression system, and updated the third edition rulebook. Third edition rulebook, I think that's one I wrote myself, and it had taken all the player feedback for first and second. So the third edition is really the most well-rounded experience.
Actually, can I walk back just a second? What were some of the specific things that you heard players say? Because I think in terms of a main criticism that people have of Grimslingers, it's the accessibility, at least for the first previous editions. It's like, it's such a different game. I'm not getting it. The rules aren't giving me access to the game, that kind of thing. Is that, and maybe like specific things kind of within that, how do deactivated cards work? How does discarded work? Why are they two different things? And how, the timing and all that kind of stuff. Is that the kind of thing that you are responding to, or are you thinking of something else?
Yes. Certain things I can't fix in Grimslinger's current form. Like Greenbrier didn't want to reprint certain cards. So like you'll notice in third edition, some cards reference a face-off. And I removed the face-off from the third edition, but they wouldn't update the cards. So like the rulebook's new, but the cards are all second edition, which is frustrating. So there's certain things that no matter how much I want them to be done, can't happen or won't happen. So specific feedback is like, okay, the face-offs get very monotonous. Like they're really cool. People really like the face-off the first time. They're like, wow, that's a neat mechanic. It's kind of like not a poker game, a blackjack game. But after a while, there's there's really no strategy to it. It's very random, and I wanted the game to not be as random because that was another thing people said. Things are too random. So I took off the face-off, and you could count more on what you were going to play, your elemental spells. For deactivating cards, before that was like a timer, so after a turn you would get them back. But that was really confusing people, so I just made it like a separate discard pile, which is not amazing, but it works, and it's less confusing than what it was. Another thing was, like the campaign not having enough options. Mm-hmm. There's some other things that are escaping me at the moment, but like they're very specific. Oh, one is like turn order. People were getting because originally everyone played at the same time, and depending on, it was a really confusing turn order thing. So I changed that so where you have a first player token and then you're passing it around, and that made it way more straightforward of whose turn it was and then how you resolve things in order. Mm-hmm. So that was some stuff, yeah.
Okay, and so all of that is player feedback. You're like you said, you got the Google alert going. How X amount of times a day you're getting Grimslingers. You're hearing the updates and everything, and you are super active on the BG boards. You throw up a question and there you are. It's within a very short amount of time. So then moving towards the 3rd edition and then eventually the Northern Territory. You mentioned before that the Greenbrier is asking for a certain thing, but then you give them you give them basically a whole new, like revamp of the game. But then there's there was a little bit of like kind of how much are we going to put into revamping all the cards and stuff. Has that been a kind of a difficult process?
I wouldn't say it's difficult. I'd say it's frustrating because like I'm the guy who I feel like people associate, maybe this is just because I'm me, associate me more with Grimslingers than they do with Greenbrier. And the decisions made with Grimslingers more with me than they do with Greenbrier. And that's fine. But when it's very disheartening when I get flack for something that I want to change, but I can't. And that part's frustrating. Like the story booklet in all editions is the 1st edition story booklet. So it even references rules that just don't exist in the 3rd edition anymore. I have rewritten that and sent it to Greenbrier, but because they aren't reprinting the story booklet for whatever reason, I still get questions like, what's up with this? And I get frustrated because I want it to be a cohesive and coherent experience, but there are certain things that I can't change that inevitably are going to make it like players encounter this and it's like, what the heck is this? Like, what is I can't remember what the thing is called. It's like a fast draw duel or something like that. That was in the 1st edition. Mm-hmm. And so I'm constantly answering the same questions over, and like I don't want people to be confused, but I don't have the opportunity at the moment to create one cohesive rule set throughout the cards and the booklets and everything. So that's frustrating. Mm-hmm. So it's not difficult, just frustrating.
So like you can get through it. And I think, accessibility is still an issue in a sense where you have I remember sitting with, when I was first learning it, me and Wendy, we hopped on Skype and we both sat there with like 7 books. You had the area booklet, you had the 3rd edition rule book, you had the 4th edition rule book. We had, how does Child of Light fit and everything. I think that could be a little bit much in terms of people getting access to the game. I think Wendy would agree, once you kind of hop over that barrier, it's a pretty satisfying experience. But it does now that you kind of talk about it, does make a little bit of sense why that had to be that way. And I can kind of see it from Greenbrier's perspective as well, in terms of, I don't know how much the cost of these things are or anything. I doubt it's like malicious or anything, but that's the reality too. It's like, okay, we have to basically junk everything because you can't just like tweak a couple things. It has to be a whole redo of stuff. Like this, they did the same thing with Aeon's End, right? So Aeon's End had a couple cards, it had some art issues, and like they decided to, okay, we're just going to do a whole new 1st edition. All right, everybody, throw away your previous stuff.
Yeah.
So that's a difficult thing as well.
And that was a challenging thing with the 3rd edition Kickstarter, is like people who have the 1st edition and they want the expansion, they don't want to rebuy the core game, and so it's like, it creates kind of this complex situation.
I think part of the problem also was there were characters in the first core game that you couldn't play in the second game, in the Northern Territory.
In the expansion, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, so if you had a character that you were taking through the first game and and then you bought the second game thinking that you would just revive that character, it wasn't possible.
Yeah, unless you had the
Nyoko.
Kickstarter exclusive characters, because one of them, their skills can be played with anyone.
Right.
Oh.
But it was a Kickstarter exclusive, so again, that's a frustrating thing. It works well for a Kickstarter, it drives sales, but as a designer, you're like, I designed this for a specific reason, but it can't really get out there. And it's the nature of the beast, I guess. Although I did pick the characters most people were playing. I'd say like 80%.
Okay, so then, in terms of the future, you were talking about developing like a sequel to Grimslingers. Did that become Northern Territory, or is there still kind of a next iteration of this system coming down the pike?
I'm in a tough spot where in 2020, Grimslingers, the rights to it, all the files, everything reverts back to me because I didn't want to use Greenbrier anymore, and so we made a new deal where basically we're Northern Territory and the core game have kind of lived out their lifespan. Everything comes back to me. And so I'll have full control of Grimslingers and how it goes forward. Now, I work for Arcane Wonders, so I might completely refresh the game and put it out through Arcane Wonders if they want to. I don't know why they wouldn't. Because a big reason they hired me was because of the cool stuff I did on Grimslingers. And or I don't do that, and I don't know. Like, if I make a new game, all of your stuff you already own is gone, right? Like, this new game can't suppose that you have that stuff. It would be different card stock, and that's a tough situation. The game will continue the story because there's a cool story that I'm trying to tell, and so I think fans of the story and people who were burned by the old one, would like the new one. But currently, what I am doing is I am working on an experimental game that uses an app. I put out an app for Grimslingers. That was kind of like to test what I could and couldn't do with certain things. So I'm working on a game that is based in the Grimslingers world, and it's following the same story as Grimslingers. It's not called Grimslingers, but it uses an app, and this game is a hybrid game of digital and board game that is kind of my answer to everything some people have said and criticized and where I want to go. It's like, if I could just start fresh, what is it going to be? I don't know if this will work because you have to have a device to play it. And if it doesn't, then I'll probably go back to just cardboard and continue the story from there. It's kind of a weird situation, but the digital thing is really where my heart is at, because I want to create a game where the accessibility is just so easy. You can just pick it up, it in 10 minutes. The app helps you with remembering everything. It keeps all your progression in there. It allows me to do cool stuff like randomized loot and randomly generated loot and hidden secrets and stuff like that. And then the cardboard lets you have that physical feel of like sitting down with people and moving cards around. And yeah, I know that was a long-winded answer. I'm sorry. But that's where my head is at. And just releasing a new expansion for Grimslingers it's just not going to be with Greenbrier. And I will say one thing, all the criticism can get just wanting to move on to like a totally new thing is kind of where I'm at, because it's like Grimslingers is, I probably shouldn't say this, but it's fundamentally broken in certain ways. It's still a great experience if you can get into it, but like I said, there's certain things I can't change, and I kind of just want like a fresh start for Grimslingers when I do my next thing.
Oh, can we ask, or is it something that you want us to discover for ourselves as gamers?
It became more convoluted than I I wanted it to be from the start. Like I'm a person who I don't like to sit down for 2 hours and play a game, an hour at most. And Grimslingers, especially in the Northern Territories, it can be pretty lengthy. So I just wanted to still have great strategy to it all, but I'd probably completely remove the rock, paper, scissors stuff, redo your character and have it more of an RPG kind of feel, have you be your own Grimslinger and then playing along with the characters as opposed to you being the characters. And there are other things that I find the map system in Northern Territory just takes too long. There's something that just take too long. I just want it to be simple, easier to understand.
Yeah, that would be my biggest criticism is that Grimslingers does not hit my table as often as I'd like it to, just because of the time it takes to put the map system together. I love the map system. I love the fact that it's different every single time I play, and I love that it's like it's changing. It's ever changing, but especially playing through the path when I don't know if Jason had this in his path because I didn't peek at his path like he peeked at the others. But the path that I took had me going through several different maps at one point to get to my end game. And so it was like, okay, I made it through the end of my map. Now I have to break this down and make a whole new map again, which means all new cards and all new baddies and all new event cards and all that other stuff. And so it was just like, okay, I'm going to put this away for tonight. I'll deal with it. I'll play with it again another night.
I ended up developing like a hack for that. So like I would count where I'm going or where I start, and I'll count where I end. And I'm like, okay, there's 7 cards there and there's 2 event cards here. So I just put those 7 cards into like a deck, and I just turned the deck. I wasn't exploring. I
Did you
I
use
knew I
GPS
wanted
to pick your route? Yeah, so that was the reason. But once it's on my table, I totally love the experience. I'm in it. I'm in it to win it, and I'm there, and I'm totally immersed in the adventure and what's going on, and I'm loving every minute of it. It's just that, okay, I got to build this map, and so sometimes I'll build that map like during the day and then play at night, so that it's just sitting there waiting for me, and then I'll play it later on. But that's my biggest complaint, and why it doesn't get to my table more than it should.
I really appreciate players like you. I know Grimslingers has its problems, but there are still lots of people who like persevere because they're really into the story and the thing, and they get through it and they have fun, and I enjoy it so much hearing people not bash on it because there's rock, paper, scissors or something,
Yeah, well,
there's nothing wrong with rock, paper, scissors. It's been played for how many thousands of years, you know? I don't know, but I mean, it's a core mechanic in gaming. There are so many games that use it as an underlying mechanic. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you enjoy, I enjoy the characters, I enjoyed the story, and I was going to get through to the end. I was going to get my ending, and I was going to know what happened in this story, because you want to know. I was that invested in what was going on in the story that it kept bringing me back to the table, despite the fact that I was like, I got to build the map.
I think at the end of the day, it is one of my favorite adventure card games. Just because, I think I've been at this for 90% episodes. I think people have figured this out about me at this point. I like unique. Don't give me the same old thing. There's a lot of games that are just like rock solid, but they're way down on my list, even though they're like really fun. But I've played that before, and I can honestly say I've not played a game like Grimslingers before. It's one of the most unique adventure card games you can get. There is that accessibility issue. There's a big hump you have to jump over, and me and Wendy are sitting there on Skype trying to figure it out. but once you land there, you're in for a pretty fun time. You're in for some gnarly art. You're in for some and not just like the art and the style and the theme of it, but like interesting mechanics as well with the hand management and all that kind of thing. So at the end of the day, I think that's kind of where I fall with Grimslinger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So thank you so much, Stephen, for joining us, for, talking a little bit about your journey with the game, talking about, where the game's been, where the game's going. I think sometimes people see the games on the table and they think like it's this wonderful utopia between designer and publisher. And it's like, oh, they all collaborated together. We all love the games and everything. And that's just not kind of what happens sometimes, there's a give and take, and I think that there's, you have a perspective and Greenbrier has a perspective, and, we're going to continue covering Greenbrier Greenbrier Games. Walter, I love you. So, I think, it's just a question of, I think different people have different passions, and the passions just kind of go in different ways. But I definitely, we're on board for what's next with Grimslingers, what's next, with, some of the other stuff you're designing, and definitely the art stuff. We saw your art in folklore. We saw your art, we're going to see it in other places. We're totally looking forward to it, man. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
So we're going to wrap the episode right now. Wendy, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, no, thanks for having me. Thanks for talking with us today, Stephen. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
All right, that is going to do it for another episode of Every Night is Game Night. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Stephen and to Wendy for pitching in and the conversation. I really hope that, you may be a Grimslingers fan, you may not be a Grimslingers fan. I think the intention of the conversation was obviously to feature the game, which you heard me and Wendy, we're pretty big fans. Despite some of the, we kind of equated it to like a really cool city, but then it's kind of has a very confusing highway system. So you can't really get into the city without pretty careful GPS. That's kind of how our metaphor for Grimslingers. So, we talked about that, but also just in terms of, iteration and interacting with publishers. We hope that was a very cool kind of window into all that. It's an interesting story. And we're very happy for Stephen to be, as open and honest, but yet in a respectful way as possible, sharing his story. So that was really cool. If you want to interact with us about this episode or any others, you can join our Facebook group, Every Night is Game Night. Hit me up on Twitter, ENGN_podcast. We have a geek list on BGG where you can comment on the individual episodes. Those 3 arenas are probably the best way to reach out to us. I would like to ask a favor of you guys. I ask this favor very, very often, and I'm going to ask it again. Please go to iTunes or any place where you can rate podcast. Give us 5 stars or however many stars you think we deserve. If you want us to float on top of the algorithms, get as high in the ratings as possible so that we can share some of this content to you. We are barreling towards episode 100. Yes, we are completely aware of that. It's a great milestone for us. We're really excited. So, and we're looking forward to producing at least 100 more episodes. So the more visibility, the more outreach we can get with the podcast, the better. We think every person who helps us out either with rating or with commenting or sharing the podcast with friends, recommending in different threads. Thank you all so much for that. That is so, so cool. So just want to give you guys a shout out for that. So that is all, as Anthony would say at the end of every episode. Go ahead and grab a solo game off of that shelf, and let's make every night a game night.